Todos y todas muy bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Y antes de comenzar, quisiera solicitar autorización para grabar esta charla. Si alguien se opone, por favor que lo indique en este momento. Muy bien, al parecer. Entiendo que en la sala, Nicole, tampoco hay alguien que se oponga a la grabación. ¿No? Perfecto. Muchas gracias. Recordar entonces a los y las docentes algo muy importante. Docentes UdeC, hasta el 13 de septiembre estará abierta la convocatoria Educa COVID. Este fondo financia iniciativas para adaptar la docencia, promover la interacción y motivación en el aula virtual. Recuerden que solo hay plazo hasta el 13 de septiembre. Importante postular a estos fondos. Hemos tenido una semana muy enriquecedora y con grandes oportunidades para actualizar nuestros conocimientos, interactuar con colegas, compartir ideas y reflexiones y, por sobre todas las cosas, mirar a través de un nuevo caleidoscopio la hermosura de educar y formar a nuestros y nuestras estudiantes. Por cerca de 2 años hemos transitado grandes desafíos, continuos e impensados. Nos hemos adaptado porque ha sido la única forma de avanzar y hemos descubierto cuánta creatividad, fuerza y resiliencia habitan en nuestro interior. Sin ninguna duda, hoy estamos más preparados y preparadas para enfrentar este segundo semestre. Y para dar cierre a esta semana entonces, el día de hoy conoceremos la experiencia del profesor Bond, quien nos acompaña desde Virginia, Estados Unidos. Les recordamos que durante la presentación podrán realizar comentarios y o consultas vía chat, tanto en esta sala como en la sala de Nicole, donde está haciendo la traducción, las cuales leeremos al final de la exposición. Siéntanse en libertad de escribirlas en inglés o en español. Las mismas también podrán ser expuestas en este canal por micrófono. La exposición tendrá una duración de 45 minutos y posterior a eso tendremos 15 minutos para escuchar, responder consultas, comentarios y dialogar con el profesor. Como comentaba, la señorita Nicole Mieres está en el otro canal para todos y a todas aquellas que quieran cambiarse de canal. Esto significa salir de este y entrar al enlace donde está la traducción simultánea. Le voy a pedir entonces a Juan Francisco que por favor pegue el enlace en el chat por si alguna profesora, profesor no lo tiene a mano. Muy bien. Comenzamos entonces con la presentación del Dr. Aaron Bond de Virginia Tech University. Dr. Bond has worked in the field of instructional technology, distance education, and professional development for more than 20 years. He has served as a corporate trainer, face-to-face classroom instructor, an online instructor, and as a secondary principal. Currently, he serves as the Senior Director of Learning Services in Technology, Enhanced Learning and Online Strategies at Virginia Tech, where he oversees faculty professional development, learning techniques, and instructional design. He has earned a bachelor's degree in history from Mary Baldwin College, a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies from Fort Hays State University, an educational specialist degree in educational leadership and policy studies from the University of Virginia, and a PhD from Virginia Tech in curriculum and instruction. His research includes authentic learning experiences, communities of practice, socio-cognitive factors on learning, and distance learning. He is the co-author of the book Building Virtual Communities for Practice for Distance Educators. El título de la exposición que hoy escucharemos es Engaging Students Through Remote Interactions. Adelante, profesor, please Professor Aaron, whenever you want. We are here to listen. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me today. It's an honor to be here and to be talking with so many very smart people who are teaching and on the front lines with the students right now. Much of what I'm going to say you probably have had experience with over the last year and a half, but I'm going to try to help put some perspective and some research and some best practices in your hands so that you can do this remote teaching thing better. I'm not sure when the pandemic is going to end. I'm not sure how this COVID situation will end up, but what I am sure of is that we will be doing more and more remote teaching and learning, more flexible learning because of our experiences over the past year and a half. The world is changing. We're constantly going to be looking for ways to have continuity with instruction with our students, no matter what emergency situation arises. So today I'd like to talk about some interaction strategies for addressing real problems. Again, my research area is in authentic learning and the importance of giving students the ability to apply what they learn in real life situations. So we'll talk about that some. I won't make that the focus of this presentation, but I can't talk about interaction without talking about meaningful interaction, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about. We'll talk about some research-based pedagogical practices for designing meaningful group interactions in your classroom. We'll recognize use of a variety of online collaborative tools, and I'll explain along the way how all of the strategies, all of the tools that we're going to discuss apply theory. They're grounded in real research-based practice. So that research tells us there's 3 types of interaction in a classroom or in a remote environment. And that is student to teacher interaction, student to content interaction, and student to student interaction. And that's those interactions go both ways, right? Students in a remote environment or in a flexible environment, meaning that they have some online work and some face-to-face work if possible. There's a technology component that is thrown into the mix. There is a mediator now between the student and the teacher, between the student and the content, and between the teacher and the content and the teacher and the student. The technology can be a barrier if we aren't careful. If we think very carefully about how we use the technology in our courses, how we use Canvas, how we use the learning management system, how we use Microsoft Teams, if we plan those interactions, we can make sure that they are meaningful and that we are not needlessly putting barriers in front of our students. I have worked with in this particular field for many, many years, and I have seen faculty, professors, teachers find a new technology, something that they think is really cool, and they try to implement it into their class. And they do so without giving the students the reason behind using the technology, and they do it without providing education or tutorials on how to use the technology. And it is often a failure. It's a failure because you have inadvertently put a barrier between you and your students, or between the content that you want the students to learn and the students. So I encourage you to think very carefully about what technology you incorporate. I would incorporate things that that your students have readily accessible to them, that's provided by the university, and to stay away from tools that require students to pay extra as well. too far. But we're talking about remote learning, and there's different kinds of remote learning. There's synchronous and asynchronous, and in some ways they are a blend of those things. So if we're thinking about a synchronous experience, right now we are in an interactive video conference. That's like a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams meeting. That's synchronous. We are synchronously learning together. If I did this interaction well, which I because this is a presentation, I have time limits and all of the things around it. But if I were doing this in a real class, I would have breakout rooms. I would be breaking you out, having you work together and interacting with each other and learning from each other and solving problems together synchronously. I would reserve my talk, if I was in a real classroom, I would reserve that to a 5 or 10 minute talk and have students visit the content online before having the synchronous conversation. And the synchronous conversation, we could really use that time to dig in and solve problems, real life problems, using the content that we have learned. In the asynchronous environment, it's a learning management system. I think you use Canvas. We also use Canvas at our university. You can have websites, narrated lectures for download. You could record yourself. You could build blogs, wikis. You create discussion forums, email, all for interaction so that students have the ability to interact with each other in an online environment. It's asynchronous. It becomes self-paced in some sense, but self-paced also has a negative connotation. For many, self-paced means that I can come to that content and I can do it at my pace when I want, and there are no deadlines. So we have to be careful about how we use that term. But if we say self-paced with deadlines, then we can set boundaries and expectations for our students to interact in these tools with a specific deadline in mind. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we might do the same activity in different ways. So if my learning outcome is differentiate among the 3 major learning theories, so in my field, there are 3 major learning theories. There's behaviorism, cognitive science, and constructivism. And so if we're asking our students to differentiate between those 3 things, if I was in my face-to-face classroom and we were back to normal, I'd have students in small groups work to create a Venn diagram of key principles for each theory. So a Venn diagram has 3 circles, and in each of those circles, there are things that each principle has that's separate, and things that overlap are where the circles overlap. And if I'm doing the same activity online, I could pretty much do it just like I would do it in my face-to-face classroom. I can use the breakout rooms in Zoom or in Microsoft. We have Zoom at my institution. You have Microsoft Teams. We could use the breakout rooms to and the whiteboard features for the students to do the same thing, but they could do it in the conversation synchronously online. Now, you can do the same activity online asynchronously, but it is a little harder to do that with your students to do a Venn diagram together online. There are tools available where they can do some brainstorming together, but that is a little harder to do when you're not synchronously meeting. I suggest, and this is the difference between interacting with students and interacting with content. If my learning outcome is that students will differentiate between the 3 major learning theories, I need to determine whether or not I want my students to focus that on interacting together. There's nothing in my learning outcome that says students will work together to differentiate among the 3 major learning theories. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say students will build community by differentiating among the 3. My learning outcome is that students just know the difference between the 3 major learning theories And so I can actually do an asynchronous online activity to reinforce the content that doesn't involve interaction. If your outcome, if your objective for your particular activity does involve interaction, then you can find tools that you can have students interact with. It just is a little more work and a little more work on your students. So remember, we don't want to put a barrier between the students using technology. So making it as easy and seamless as possible for students to interact. Instead of using a Venn diagram, I could change my activity to have students do a discussion post. And in that discussion post, I could ask the question, how do the three major learning theories, how are they similar and how are they different? And then I could have my students discuss that and interact with the content that way as well. So just some options and some things to think about as you're planning for remote learning and as you are planning to do that through interaction. There are some remote learning myths. And while I've been talking about barriers to students, there are also barriers to faculty and teachers and professors implementing software systems into the classroom. Software systems are too hard to learn. Well, that is kind of a half myth, right? It's a half myth because if it's a software that you're already familiar with, it's a software that is widely used and that your students are familiar with, that's something that is easily integrated into the class. The other side of the coin of that is that some softwares really are too hard to learn and that you have to really think hard about how you do that. As an instructor, it is detrimental to the class if you try to implement a technology that you are unfamiliar with. So make sure you take advantage of any training that's available. And if the training can make you more effective, why not do it? If you can just take some time to really dig in and learn the tool that you're expecting your students to use, it will make your class so much better, and it'll make your experience so much better. And this is a two-way street. When we talk about interaction, we're also talking about increased workload for you and for your students. And so finding real ways to interact with the content and with the students that is meaningful is the most important part of what I'm trying to impart today. Another remote learning myth is I won't be able to connect with my students. We have heard this for many years and we've heard it from students and we've heard it from everyone that they do feel disconnected from their professors and their teachers in an online environment, in a remote environment. I've also heard the flip side of that is that the online environment offers many more ways for connections. As technology continues to advance, as our communication channels continue to advance, there are so many ways that you can connect with your students. For the past year and a half, I've been interacting with my students mainly online. I had one hybrid experience where I had my students, had 10 students coming to class face-to-face and 10 remote, because we could only have 10 people in one room at a time because of social distancing and other precautions. So students would sign up to be face-to-face and the other students would attend online. It's funny, it started out 10 students coming and then it went to 5 and then it went to 2. And by the end of the semester, there were only 2 students regularly attending face-to-face, and most folks were attending online. And I think because they realized they were getting the exact same experience. They were getting interactions from me and with their students that were very meaningful. If you are in a remote situation, if you're teaching remote, it is a little more work to keep up with the interaction in your class, because you have email, you have lots of things. So let's talk about how we might connect with our students and stay connected. In the remote teaching, we are bombarded with emails from our work. We're bombarded by research questions in our email. We're bombarded by vendors trying to get us to purchase things. Our email box is so, for at least in my experience, our email boxes are overwhelmingly full. And so as students email you, it is hard to keep up with the questions that they're asking. So I suggest that you organize your email and create a folder in your email for your class if you don't have that. And as questions come in, have it automatically, have your students put in the subject line the name of your class, and that will you can put a filter in your inbox to make that go directly to that folder. If you don't have time or the expertise to do that, it's very simple to just, as those messages come in, to just move it to that folder yourself. Tell students that you will answer questions within 24 hours. Give them that expectation. If it's going to be longer, if you are not going to answer emails over the weekend, just let your students know that. Because I'm telling you, for a student in today's rapid pace environment, they are waiting for a response. They're not used to an uninstant response. And I'm old school, and so I kind of, am used to people taking a day or two to respond to me, but our students aren't used to that. Our students are expecting immediate feedback. So if you set that expectation, you let them know, hey, I have all of my mail go to this folder, and I check it, and I answer mail at 2 o'clock every day. So the students will know that at around 2 o'clock, if they've sent the message before 2, that they'll be expecting a response around that time. If they are sending an email at 4 o'clock, they'll know that it will be 2 o'clock the next day before you're looking at that email. So putting that email into one folder allows you to put some expectations on you about when you'll answer the email, sets expectations for your students, and it puts you in the right place and mind to answer the emails from the students. Because I get lots of stupid questions. No question is stupid, but I get lots of stupid questions from my students because they haven't read instructions, they haven't read the syllabus, they haven't read, and so they send me questions. And if I were in the wrong state of mind, if I didn't have that specific time each day to look at that email before I answered the email, my tone might convey that they were annoying me with that question. So I am very cognizant of the importance of building relationships with my students and making them feel comfortable and safe. And so organizing the email has helped me find a great space and an appropriate tone to respond to students. Speaking of not reading and asking questions that they should know the answer to, you can save some standardized responses. If your students are asking the same question, then maybe your directions aren't clear. And so you can adjust your course with that, but you can also save some standardized responses and that you just copy and paste and send to help save time. If you set up a frequently asked questions section in your course, you could, in your discussion board, I know Canvas has a pretty robust discussion board, you could have pin that right to the top of the discussion and say, ask your questions here, and give the class the option to answer each other's questions. And then you, of course, you can check in once a day to make sure that they're giving each other the right answers. The worst thing about the FAQ and the question forum and is that sometimes students, give each other the wrong answer and they all agree that it's the right answer. And you have to set the record straight, but it can still be a time saver most of the time. Teach your students to swim, but use student groups to your advantage. I have my students come in cohorts, so my class is a very group work heavy class. We do group work every class almost. There are exceptions to that, but the majority of the classes are groups, and so they are working in one cohort, and they are working on projects together throughout the semester, and so they've come to rely on each other for help more than for me, and that has been very helpful as well. There's instant messaging tools that you can use, Skype, Messenger, WhatsApp, GroupMe. Canvas has notification settings. Just make sure your students have turned on the notifications. You can send messages that go directly to students in their text messages. You can set up GroupMe WhatsApp if you want to get an announcement out really quick. Those are great ways to do that. If you want to have a regular conversation going with your students, you can do that. You can also, in my experience, the best thing to do with that is to say, we'll offer these at different dates and times so that everyone has the opportunity to attend those, and that they have a start and end time. IM can be overwhelming as well to our students and to us, because if you're getting message after message back to back in your own group text, it can get annoying. So make sure that folks can opt in and they have the option to opt out, and that it has a determined start and end time for use. You can also encourage students to form study groups using WhatsApp. It's funny, all of the groups in my classes, they have over the years found ways to keep in contact with each other on their own. I've only suggested that they find ways to keep in touch, but they create these online study groups or digital study groups automatically. You can also use an instant messenger for your office hours. So whether you could use Zoom for office hours or your Microsoft Teams for office hours, but if you want to give students the option to just be able to ask their question in a direct message to you in an instant messaging app, you can set up an office hour to do that. Video chat, it's what we're doing right now. It's a great way if you have an asynchronous class, meaning that most of the course content is online, self-paced with deadlines, without very much interaction. A good way to set the stage for how the semester will be is to do an introductory class on video chat. You can do a question session, live discussions. Again, you can do office hours, and you can have students use this same thing for group work and for their group meetings outside of class, if they want to set up such a thing. So let's talk a little bit about the pedagogical implications of mastery, and what do I mean? What I mean by that? Mastery is the ability to for your students to take what they learn in their class and apply it to a variety of situations. If we are teaching for transference, there are two different types of transference. There's near transference and far transference. Near transference means that the students can take what they have learned in your class and apply it to the exact same problem that they learned how to that they learned the skills solving. So, for example, if I'm teaching a student how to use algebra, and I teach them to use algebra in order to measure distance. If I then ask that student to use algebra to solve an accounting equation, and the student can't apply it in that instance, then they have only learned or transferred that knowledge in a near way. Far transference would be that the student is able to take that same knowledge that they learned from algebra, apply it in how to determine a distance, and also how to use it in accounting. And really far transference would be to take it and do many other things with it. So mastery is the ability for students to use what they've learned in real-world context to solve multiple problems. So as you are thinking about your course and how you're going to incorporate interaction into your course, you should be thinking about what skills from my course are transferable to real-world context. What pieces of my course do I want to ask my students to solve real problems with? And I misplaced this slide, but we'll go here. So in my world, we do a lot of course evaluations, course reviews. We have a standard checklist that we use at Virginia Tech for our flexible courses. And we do peer evaluation. So we take this checklist, we go into the courses, and we check to see, and when I say we as peers are checking to see that the instructor is providing feedback, that they have set up preferred means of communication, that they're encouraging students to ask questions, and that they are responding to student questions within 1 or 2 business days. So what I was just talking about before is what we actually do, and we encourage our faculty to do this. And if we do a peer evaluation, we can give them feedback on how to improve their communication. Sorry, that was a sidestep from mastery, but let's go back to mastery. To develop mastery, students must acquire component skills, practice integrating them, and know when to apply what they've learned. This is not me. This is a principle of learning. There are this principle is well documented in research. What that means is that students have to be able, through lecture, through reading, through any way that they can get the knowledge into their brain, they have to acquire that component skill. If they don't practice with it, if they don't interact with that content in some way, they will not know when to apply the skills. So they have to get the basic knowledge. They have to take that basic knowledge and extend it somehow. You can extend it by interacting with the content. You can extend it by having students interact with each other. You can extend it by doing brainstorming sessions with you leading that session as the instructor. But unless students have some interaction in some way, they will not be able to know when to apply the skills. They will not be able to get that knowledge that they have acquired, or that skill that they've acquired, from their long-term memory to application. So practice, interaction is a key component of learning. The best way that you can help students acquire the component skills is to realize that you have an expert blind spot. You as the instructor, you as the expert in the field, know the content backwards and forward. And so you need to break those complex tasks or any complex concept into manageable chunks and allow students to practice with it. Even 45 minutes of practice can make a difference. And you have to make connections between those small tasks and the larger picture. If I'm teaching algebra, I keep going to algebra, maybe you should do something else, but if I'm teaching algebra, I have to teach that in small chunks. I cannot teach someone to do algebra in Excel without teaching them how to use Excel and teaching them how to use algebra. Then I can teach them how to use both together. But you can't teach them to do 2 complex tasks together, and you have to allow for practice. You can have students talk about their algebra experience, have them explain to each other how they came to the solution to the problem that they solved. And that's true for any subject, any field. Break those things into manageable chunks and have your students practice integrating them. More research about interaction here. The social context in which the cognitive activity takes place is integral to the learning process. Now, these are old references, but they have stood the test of time. These are the original folks who were doing this research. And they have found that the social context, how you learn, how you interact with each other, has an integral effect on the learning process. Situated learning models, so giving students activities that mimic real-life problems or situations, make the content acquisition easier. It makes the application of that content easier if students have multiple ways to solve problems. And oftentimes, solving those problems with peers will stick. So learning occurs through activity, discussion, and reflection. And this is key. We oftentimes do the activity, we do encourage discussion, but we forget that reflection is an important part of that as well. If students don't take some time to think about the content or to reflect on the opinions of their peers, or on how they got to the solution, meaningful learning can be lost that way. Group interactions and conversations lead to higher order thinking skills. Students who have these group interactions and conversations have a higher ability to apply what they have learned. This was very much what my classroom was like when I was in school. But this is not the 21st century classroom. In the 21st century, we're asked to teach our students to work in a team, to prepare them to work in the real world. We're asked to give students the ability to make decisions and solve problems, the ability to plan, organize, and prioritize their work, to communicate verbally with people inside and outside an organization, to have proficiency with computers, to analyze data, and to process information and to determine which of that information, because we're bombarded by a lot, what of that information do we need to process and actually use. So you can do that very well in a remote environment, right? Because we have so many tools available to us, even just in our learning management system, Canvas, and in Microsoft Teams. There are so many things that we can do with our students to help them get those skills. We can allow for practice using technology, so we can have branching in our tests and quizzes. We could do modules. We can build websites where students answer questions and are taking down many paths. We can provide for a variety of ways for students to discuss with each other, to interact with each other, to talk about the content. The instructional strategies, though, mean that we have to constrain the scope somewhat. We have to put some boundaries and parameters around what it is we want the students to interact with. Students can't just be sent into an interaction mode, right? They have to have some foundational knowledge, which is what we were talking about a little earlier. They have to be able to take what they have learned about a foundational skill and apply it. They can't just be asked to solve a problem if they haven't been taught the many skills that go into solving the problem. So it means that we need to make conditions and context of our application explicit. We need to provide examples of diverse context, diverse ways that you can use that skill set to solve problems. Make students responsible for their own learning, and we really need to help them be able to take the small pieces of a problem and generalize it to larger principles. I'm going to skip this because we've already talked about that. And I'll skip that too. One way we can do this, where we can give students the ability to practice the many smaller skills sets, is to use case studies. Case-based learning is a very well-researched pedagogical strategy where you give students a story, and then it's a story about a problem, and ask them to use what they learned in your class to solve that problem. It's a great way to have students practice getting to mastery of the content you want them to learn. There's a high level of retention. It can help develop critical thinking skills. And again, it's telling the story. It's finding an authentic problem for students to solve that has several possible solutions. The best case studies, they don't have a yes or no answer. There are many different paths to get there, and this case studies allows you to give students multiple contexts for solving problems using the skills and content from your area. If I were thinking about a typical class, I would not be doing case studies in class until probably week 4 or 5 in a 15-week course, because that gives me 5 weeks to give foundational knowledge, to get students to the point in knowledge and skill acquisition that they could then apply those concepts to cases. You might practice using smaller cases or introductory cases in the earlier weeks, but the more complex cases, I would be saving them until my students have the skill set needed to solve them. Build questions and scaffolding to help students solve the questions. Create open-ended questions and allow for creativity. Again, we go back to reflection, having students reflect on how they got to the answer and what they learned about the problem and what they learned about the skill sets and the skills that they learned in your class. Wikis are a great way to have students work together to create a body of knowledge. There's Canvas is basically a wiki itself. It is, if you use pages in Canvas, you can have students, you can assign students to pages, you can assign groups to pages. There are 3 models in wikis for interaction. One is cooperation, and I guess this is true for not just wikis, but if we were asking students to solve a problem and to build a knowledge repository, wikis are a great way to do that. But this model is true for most group work. Cooperation means that your students are cooperating. They're saying, you take this part of this project or this part of this problem, and I'll take the other part of the problem. So they're sharing in the work, but they're not really collaborating. One person is working on one piece and the other person is working on another piece. Collaboration and cooperation is, let's work on this together. You take this piece, you take that piece, and then we'll come back and we'll edit each other's work. That's collaboration and cooperation. Collaboration, cooperation, and peer assessment is taking it to another level, where one group is collaborating and cooperating. They're working together, maybe taking pieces and then coming back and editing each other's work. And then another group is coming in and providing peer assessment of that work or giving them feedback on what they have found. And you can do that through comments in wikis or asking folks to come in and provide feedback. So lots of different ways for interaction using wikis. Very similarly, I guess Wiki or Google Docs would be another example of how you might have students work together in that way, using a shared document where folks can add their own work and edit each other's work, and then having folks come in to provide peer assessment. Discussion boards are just that, right? They are places for students to get together and discuss topics from your class, and students know what busy work is, and if you're just assigning a discussion board just to say I have interaction in my class, I'm just going to have students summarize in the discussion board a video or summarize chapter 2. Even asking them to watch a video and offer reflection. Some of that is just busy work, right? We don't, in our face-to-face classes, we don't say, go watch a video and come back and tell us what you learned from the video. We don't do that in a discussion forum, or if we're having a discussion class. And so we shouldn't do it online either. We should provide ways for students to have rich discussion, authentic discussion. Having a case study is a great way to do that. Putting a story in and saying, solve this problem, and having students see how each other got to that point, how their thought processes got them to that authentic problem-solving situation. E-portfolios is very similar. You can have students, well, it's not similar, it's just it's similar in that it's an interaction tool. It's a great way for students to display or to curate things that they've done in your class, curate content that they want to share with each other, and they can reflect on what they've learned in the class, but they can also have students provide feedback to the stuff that they put in their portfolio. So I mentioned earlier that we have a checklist. We're always looking at our courses to see how we can make them better. At Virginia Tech, our standards, we're looking to see that community is being built in the classroom, that the instructor is in the class, engaging actively and frequently, that there are clear expectations of how to interact and work together as a community in the course, that activities and assignments are fostering student interaction. Do you have to have student interaction in every week or in every assignment? No. We're just making sure that students have an opportunity to interact, because we know it's a great learning experience, but it's also research-based pedagogical practice. There's a debate, and we have this debate in education. We have it quite often everywhere in higher ed in the United States. Do we need to grade participation? And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to that, right? Participation in an online class is much easier to track than participation in a face-to-face class. So by that very nature of the flexible remote learning classroom, it's easier to grade it because we can see that students are participating or they're not participating. Some say that students will only participate, will only interact in a remote classroom if there's a grade attached. In my face-to-face classes, I have had students come to class every class session. When we were having class discussions, they didn't really interact much. They didn't have much to provide to the class. But I didn't penalize them for that. I didn't take points off because Sally was not participating, and there was no way for me to really keep track of it. So it's a good conversation to have, and it's something I encourage you to think about, to reflect on how you might do that in your classroom. but grading is one of the gray areas in interaction. So just something to think about. In my experience and in the research that I've done on group work, students generally report that they do not like to do group work. Students often say that they end up being the person doing all the work, or that there's conflict and they don't want to deal with the conflict. They just want to get their learning and to get out. But it's important that if you are asking students to work together in groups, that you give them the skills they need to work together, that you teach them just like you would teach them or give them a tutorial on using technology in your class. You have to teach them how to do group work as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I allow my students to stay in the same group throughout the course. I do make exceptions to that, and we'll change the groups if there is, as you know, conflict arises or things happen. But it's also important to grade the group work fairly. If one student is doing all the work, they need to have the recourse to get a better grade than a student who is not sharing in the workload. And so there are quite a few rubrics that I've used over the years to have students or give students the ability to provide feedback on their experience working in a group. And one that I've landed on is just a yes or no kind of scale where students self-reflect and actually say how much they contributed to a particular assignment, and their peers get to say how much they participated, but also how much each other participate in the thing, and they can assign out of 100 points, they can assign if there are four members, each person can get 25 points assigned by each other, up to 25 points, and they can take points off depending on if Maria only did 17% of the work, then they give 17% or 17 to Maria, and if Bob did more than 25%, then they give him those points as well. So they can scale their points across a 100-point scale. I don't think I described that very well, but I will send you the rubric so you can see that yourself. I have some closing thoughts that I want us to think about as we are moving forward. Going back to what I said at the beginning, consider standardizing on the tools and structures for your course. Don't incorporate technology into your course midway through. Start the semester and end the semester with the same set of tools. Too many channels, too many tools can really cause cognitive load and can become a barrier between interaction for your students, interaction in all forms. So think carefully about what tools and how you structure your class. Show empathy. We're in an unprecedented time, and I know I've heard that so many times that it's kind of annoying, but we are in unprecedented times. We don't have, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when this will end. We don't know what's going on with our students. We don't know what's going on with their families. If they are remote, it's harder to judge or to see what our students are going through. So just show some empathy if students are having trouble, if they're struggling. Show your human side. Build a relationship with your students that lets them know that you care about what they're going through, about life in general. I started every class over the last year and a half with, so how are you feeling? How are things? And it just gave students a little bit of breathing room to be like, yeah, I'm struggling. This is hard. Or and it's not just about content, right? We are humans, and we crave human interaction. And so incorporating that community in your class is important. Teach students how to thrive in any environment, whether you're in an asynchronous class or in a synchronous meeting in Microsoft Teams. Teach students how to interact in all those environments, because we all interact in those environments, right? And in the real world, they will be interacting in those environments. They will be doing this their work in these contexts and in these environments. So give them the skill set to make it through. And if you do decide that you need to switch a tool, or you do need to switch a structure, provide orientation and training. Don't just throw students into the deep end of the pool. Give them what they need. And I think that is it for me. Because I want to see people, and I want to, for the question and answer, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll be ready for your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Aaron, for this important and so easy to catch and easy to apply if we talk about it in simple ways. And I'm very grateful for that. We have had an amazing week with so many different subjects, and I think this is a very good closure for it. So this will be the moment to ask questions. We have already some questions in our chat. So we're going to start reading them, and then you have the time you want to answer. So Yael, please, can you start with Miss Carola?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Professor Aaron, for that very enriching presentation. We truly appreciate it. The first question, Professor Carola, she wrote on the chat, "Thank you for this complete summary of strategies for promoting engagement and interaction. Having to implement too many of them can be very overwhelming for teachers. In your experience, if you had to choose, which ones do you consider the most effective or indispensable?"
Oh, that's a good question, and I've tried many of those over the years. I would say what I have found to be the most effective for me is using these tools for office hours. We use Zoom at my university and so I have a set office hour, but I also have office hours by appointment. And I have found that more students come to office hours in Zoom or using an instant message platform than I've ever had come face-to-face. Students who really were shy about asking questions find that to be, I guess, an easy avenue to me. And I'm a pretty easy person to get along with, but I do feel like there's an authority fence around my students where they feel like they can't ask questions, but they thrive in a digital world. And so I think they're used to an instant message or an instant video conference for help, where they would never come to my class, or never come to my office. Very different.
Thank you, Professor. Is it possible for you to open your camera, please?
Oh,
so
my camera's not on? Oh, no. I'm so sorry. I thought it was on. Was it off the whole time?
There we can see you.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much. And the next question is from Yael Flores. Thank you for sharing this enriching experience. In relation to the use of e-portfolios, can you tell us about your experience with that? Because working on e-portfolios implies time and truly comprehending the nature of such tasks or students, I mean.
Sure. So portfolios are a huge part of my class because I am a visual arts teacher. So my students are creating visual artifacts and proving that they can do use multiple tools to create multiple objects, multiple types of objects. Videos, phone, that was my phone ringing. Videos, visual images, flyers, those kinds of things are easy for students to put into a portfolio. And it is also easy because I have a template that I ask them to use. And so everyone has the same template, everyone has the same portfolio. And I guess the basic format, it's up to them to be creative in how they display the work. But if you have projects in your class that you want students to think about displaying to the world that would be beneficial for their future work, having them build a portfolio in your class is a great way to do it. I also have students provide feedback to each other on their portfolios. And I have my students write a reflection of their portfolios. Why did they choose these pieces that they chose to include in their portfolio? It's probably not for every class, but for the classes that it makes sense for. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yes, thank you.
We have another question for you from Professor Juan Francisco. He wrote, awesome lecture. Due to the period that we are living in, what was your experience at the beginning of the pandemic period? How did you deal with remote emergency teaching?
Gosh. So my role at the university is my unit operates Canvas and all of our learning tools. We run the faculty professional development team and the instructional design team. And so my experience at the beginning of the pandemic was helping 2,500 faculty move their courses online and doing rapid professional development, getting our tools prepared to move online. And I was trying to move my own class online, which it feels like such a blur and such a long time ago. But I think because I had always used Canvas to house my content, I'm happy to show my Canvas site if anybody wants to see it, but I have it broken down by week, by module. So, and I had always had an objective, a list of activities, list of readings, and links to the assignments for the class and each class period. So moving online for me was easier because I already had the class structure, already had the assignments planned, already had the work done. There's I think Brian Beatty created this term that's been used a lot lately, the high flex model. And the high flex model in California is always facing wildfires, earthquakes, natural disasters. And so in preparation for that, to be prepared to have continuity, those school systems had already mandated that all faculty be able to present their content in a variety of modes. And so they also had it easy going into remote mode because they were already prepared. All the content for the class, even if it was taught face-to-face was in a digital format with alternative assignments. That would be, so it was hard, and it was hard in other ways, not because I felt like my class was okay. What I felt was hard was teaching my students to interact in an online format, because we went completely face-to-face to completely remote, and I threw out an assignment that I just didn't think we needed to do. A major project, we just did away with it because I had to spend some time teaching my students how we were going to do this, but I've learned a great deal over the last year and a half, as I'm sure you all have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Frank asks, I'm missing the possibility to pick on the working groups while they are in a breakout room in order to observe whether they need my help, or if they are really working on the subject, or if they are distracted or lost. I normally jump between the groups on my own schedule, or I wait until they call me for help. Any suggestion how to observe student interaction in breakout rooms?
I'm not really familiar with the breakout rooms and the capabilities of Microsoft Teams, but in Zoom you can move from room to room. So I do that quite often, and it's funny that you said that, Frank, because I have moved from room to room, and I pop in and the students are just sitting there looking at each other. They're not saying anything. They're not actually discussing what I want. And so because I am moving in between the rooms, I'm having to prompt them more to help them get started. Not all groups, but there are a few groups that are just, waiting for me to call them back to the main room. And so it is a really good strategy to do that. Maria, do you know how to do that in Microsoft Teams, how to move from room to room, or anyone else?
We started this week, and we're learning. Just like you said, we need to learn before we need to practice and to do it better. But it works kind of in Zoom, but it has the differences. But we make it work.
Right. Yeah. I think, Frank, another strategy would to have a deliverable for each group. If you can't move between the different groups, I have recently had my student groups working in a Google document, and so each group that had a Google document that I had a link to, and so they would have to create a deliverable in that document while they were working in a group, and if they have to do that, it may prompt them to come back and ask questions, or because it's sad, but sometimes you have to force a discussion.
Exactly, I agree.
Okay, we have a comment regarding this very topic from Professor Frank. He wrote, yes, you can move from room to room in MS Teams. We're talking about breakout rooms while you are the organizer of the meeting. We have another question. In relation with empathy, how did you deal with mental health? Do you have an experience that you could share with us?
I have a few experiences, actually, and I had a few students reach out because they were struggling. They had family members who had contracted COVID-19, had students who did contract COVID-19, who were struggling more mentally than I think they were physically. And so we have a robust counseling center. And so I suggested the students talk to counselors at our counseling center. I offered support and help. I extended deadlines and checked in with them regularly. I had one student who didn't finish the course because of her mental health. But most everyone who I have had interactions with over the last year and a half who've had those issues, giving them some extra time and giving them some flexibility and and letting them know that you're there for them, I think helped make them successful. And I did not take points off for turning in the work late because I don't know what I would do in their situation either, right? I have two kids, and I was at home with them trying to do my job and teach them. And I was having some mental things going on in myself, right? I was tired, I was exhausted, I was feeling like there was a never-ending tunnel that we were just never going to come out of. And so I often talk to my students about how I was feeling, and maybe that's why they felt okay with sharing how they were feeling.
Thank you, Professor. We have a question, but from the other room, the one with Nicole. And the first one is, in our country currently, there has been like a progressive return to our hybrid classrooms. What would you think is or what would you feel is the best or more important challenge for this new environment of education?
So for clarification, our hybrid classrooms, are you saying half of the classes off campus and half are on? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. That's how I am teaching my classes currently. It's how I've taught them since spring. So I taught them in spring of this year using that classroom. I actually think it's okay because I don't want to force. Well, there's lots of considerations there. I don't want to force students who feel who have concerns about contracting the virus, or who have family members who are immune compromised, or who are themselves immune compromised. I don't want to force them into a space that they are uncomfortable. Research tells us over and over and over that unless students feel comfortable, they aren't going to learn as well. If students are more comfortable in an online space, and the other set of students are more comfortable in a face-to-face space, we should try to accommodate as much of that as possible. The danger in that, of course, I'm not naive, the danger in that is that some people will take advantage of the system and they'll, I don't want to get up at 8 o'clock. I just want to do it. But I'm okay with that too, because if they're getting up and coming to my Zoom session at 8 a.m., they're still going to learn, right? They're going to be there. They're going to, because my classes, I mentioned we do group work in almost every class, and they have a deliverable in every class that they have to turn in. And so we provide each other feedback on those, on the objects that they turn in each class. And I can do that online and I can do that face-to-face, and I can do it in a hybrid environment very well, because I can pair people off who are in the physical classroom, and I can pair off the folks that are online. So
thank you. And the last question, because we're already is 10:30. So the last questions for this presentation, Professor, what kind of platforms do teachers have to communicate besides the ones from the university? And why do students think about these practices? Do they appreciate them in a positive way?
I'm guessing that we're talking about communication platforms like TikTok and YouTube, and or is that probably what we're talking about? It's funny, we have some faculty on campus who have actually turned their classrooms into little viral things using YouTube and using TikTok, making small videos, and I think it's cool. I think it's meeting the students where they are. And I think if you have that creative ability to do that, then you should do it. But I also say, if you don't feel comfortable with that kind of communication, stick with what you know and stick with what you're comfortable with. Our students are adaptable. They have grown up in a digital era where they have used all of the communication platforms. And so I don't see the value in changing your communication preference and your style and what you're comfortable with, just for the novelty of it. You know, the folks who are changing and doing that are probably they probably are very comfortable in that environment, and then very comfortable with those communication tools.
Yes, I agree. Okay, thank you so much, Professor. This is the way we're going to have the final closure of the presentations. And it was really, really very interesting, because it is important for us to have different experiences, not just in Chilean experiences we have had from Mexico and now United States. So that's very important for us. Thank you so much. A continuación, la subdirectora de la Dirección de Docencia, doctora Carola Bruna Jofré, nos dirigirá unas palabras de cierre. Adelante, doctora.
Buenos días a todos y a todas. Y primero que todo voy a dirigir unas breves palabras a nuestro invitado, Dr. Bond. We would like to thank you for this interesting conference with such a broad view and key aspects to consider in virtual education, and for contributing today with your experience to our community. I hope this is the first of future collaborations, and thank you very much again.
Yeah, we definitely look forward to collaborating more. And we're going to be reaching out. We're doing a similar series, so we'll be asking for your help as well. So.
Excellent. You can count on it.
Thank you.
Ahora me dirijo a los asistentes. Estimados y estimadas docentes de la Universidad de Concepción y colegas presentes de otras instituciones. Ciertamente este ha sido un periodo muy difícil, histórico, en el cual cada uno y cada una de nosotros ha tenido que desplegar todo tipo de competencias profesionales y personales para poder garantizar la educación a través de la docencia virtual, la cual fue impulsada en todos los niveles educativos a nivel mundial, no solamente en nuestro país, por supuesto. Y tras un año de pandemia, tenemos mucho más conocimiento, más experiencia, seguimos motivados por aprender y mejorar. Y una prueba de ello es la convocatoria esta semana de perfeccionamiento, en el cual tuvimos 7 charlas abiertas a la comunidad, algunas con traducción simultánea, otras con lenguaje de señas, realizadas en Teams y en paralelo en Facebook Live, además de 8 talleres que se desarrollaron con cupos completos durante la semana. Hemos conversado sobre las buenas prácticas desde los resultados, para realizar la docencia en línea, sobre la enseñanza híbrida, que es algo que tenemos que implementar ahora, sobre las prácticas para promover la interacción desde la evidencia, desde investigación realizada en nuestra propia comunidad, especialmente sobre el efecto positivo del uso de foros, con datos que nos muestran la importancia de esta herramienta. También hemos analizado cómo atender la diversidad de nuestros estudiantes en ambientes virtuales para promover la inclusión y cómo hoy día promover el compromiso académico en el aula. Hemos ido profundizando a lo largo del tiempo, lo podemos ver en las temáticas que estamos trabajando ahora, que son bastante específicas, y siempre en pos de la calidad de los aprendizajes de nuestros y nuestras estudiantes. Quisiera felicitarles a todos y a todas por su compromiso. También veo algunos docentes muy comprometidos que reiteradamente participan de estas actividades por todo el trabajo que todos han desplegado hasta ahora, el esfuerzo y la resiliencia para seguir adelante a pesar del cansancio, a pesar de las situaciones familiares, a pesar de todo lo que nos ha conllevado esta pandemia. También quiero agradecer a cada uno y cada una de nuestras invitadas y nuestros invitados que tuvimos esta semana y al equipo de la Dirección de Docencia que hizo posible esta actividad. En especial a la Unidad de Investigación y Desarrollo Docente, quienes son los organizadores de esta jornada y coordinadores de todas las actividades, al Centro de Formación y Recursos Didácticos y al Laboratorio de Investigación e Innovación Educativa, que participaron activamente en aspectos de organización y relatoría directa de algunas de las actividades. Les quiero reforzar también que desde la Dirección de Docencia y desde la institución vamos a continuar entregando los apoyos a través de talleres, conferencias, webinars, proyectos que, como dijeron al inicio de la conferencia, está abierto en este momento en la tercera convocatoria del Fondo Educa COVID, comunidades de aprendizaje, entre otras iniciativas. Estamos siempre abiertos a escuchar sus propuestas de temáticas, de necesidades. Nos pueden escribir a la UdeC, a UdeC Lab, directamente a mí si tienen alguna sugerencia y nosotros vamos a buscar los relatores e invitados si es que no tenemos la capacidad internamente para poder apoyar estas visiones que ustedes nos puedan transmitir para poder desarrollar mejor la docencia en estas modalidades y responder a este desafío. Finalmente les deseo mucho ánimo en este segundo semestre que se inicia la próxima semana. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, subdirectora, por sus palabras. Me sumo a ellas y también agradecer a título personal al equipo UniDD y a su jefa Julieta Sánchez por el apoyo y por todo lo que ha significado también esta interacción con todos y todas los relatores, los talleres. Ha sido en verdad muy enriquecedor y agradecida también directamente al equipo. De esta manera entonces cerramos nuestra última jornada de charlas de la segunda semana de Perfeccionamiento Docente 2021. Les agradecemos su participación y a aquellos docentes que están inscritos para la tarde los esperamos. Les deseamos una excelente tarde, una excelente mañana. And again, thank you, Professor Aaron, for your participation and for being part of this Teachers Training Week. Goodbye, everyone. Muchos saludos a todos y a todas y que estén muy bien. Goodbye, Mr. Aaron. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.
Bye, bye. Chao a todos, que estén muy bien.
Chao.